Oh. Okay, so we're going to get started. I think we're on a pretty tight schedule today. Thank you for everyone that is here. I do have some notes, so I guess I should probably follow them. So first of all, thank you to our judges. Our judges are sitting right over here. So we have Ian Jansen, we have Jean-Philippe Chaput, and we have Sharon Kirkpatrick. So they'll be watching all the presentation and judging them, maybe writing mean or nice comments. We don't know. We'll see. And so they'll actually judge them, score each presentation, we'll tally them up, and the awards will be given at the reception on Friday afternoon at 4:30. So you guys should all go. I think I've heard the awards are actually pretty awesome. So let's see how things go. And in addition to the presentations, you guys can see all of the presentations are in poster format as well. So you guys can check them out there in the Riverview Lounge. So you guys can check them out there. And a quick note, if you guys aren't staying till the end but want to watch a couple, there is lunch. There's either a box lunch here after, or you can head over to the conference center and there's a hot lunch to go with the programming over there as well. For people who've never seen a Pecha Kucha before, what it is it's 20 seconds per slide, and there's 20 slides. So the slides advance automatically. Everyone's practiced a ton, I'm sure, and so they won't have any control over where things go. So fingers crossed that no one screws up. Just kidding. It's really fun. So without further ado, I think I was supposed to advance this. We've met the judges. They're great. Let's get started. So what will happen is I'll put up a white slide right here. That's not theirs. That's the one we put with their name, their title. And then as soon as I push the clicker, the time will start. So our first presenter is Brian McCrindle, who will be presenting Smoking Does Not Significantly Worsen Lipid Changes Related to Increasing Adiposity in Adolescents, a Heart Niagara Healthy Heart Schools Program Study. It's a long title. Okay. So.
Ready, set,
go.
So I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present this work. I would also like to acknowledge my collaborators, particularly the leadership and staff at Heart Niagara. Don't suppose we could go faster. So I have the following disclosures. I have some grant support from the National Institutes of Health, and I'm a consultant with industry through Agerian and Janssen. These aren't the real slides. So combined dyslipidemia of obesity is highly atherogenic and related to overproduction of triglyceride-rich VLDL particles. In youth, multiple cardiometabolic risk factors, as is noted in the setting of obesity, exponentially accelerates atherosclerosis, as is shown in this figure from an autopsy study from the longitudinal Bogalusa heart study. Using population-based NHANES data for adolescents, application of lipid guidelines from the NIH expert panel would indicate that 3.1% of those with a BMI greater than the 97th percentile might be indicated for statin treatment for high LDL, with smoking being a deciding factor for those with lower levels. Now, smoking lowers protective HDL levels by decreasing synthesis, altering metabolism, and increasing clearance, as well as rendering HDL particles potentially pro-atherogenic. The nature of the relationship between smoking and degree of adiposity on lipid abnormalities in youth is not well characterized. Given the potential impact of smoking, we sought to determine if the relationship between increasing adiposity and lipid abnormalities is worsened by current smoking in adolescents, specifically if there was a significant interaction between smoking and obesity. So we collaborated with Heart Niagara, a not-for-profit community service provider, which since 1985 has been providing CPR training and universal risk factor screening for all grade 9 students in all schools in the Niagara region as a curriculum enhancement for mandatory physical education. For the purposes of this study, we used cross-sectional data from 7 consecutive school years from 2009 to 2015. As part of a collaborative agreement, these data have been provided annually to our group in Toronto, where we have tracked trends and associations in risk factors and risk behaviors. Screening assessments include consent and completion of a questionnaire regarding family history and lifestyle behaviors, including smoking. Height, weight, and waist circumference are measured, and BMI and waist-to-height ratio are calculated. Blood pressure is also measured. Point-of-care finger-stick capillary assessment of non-fasting total cholesterol and HDL is performed, analyzed with a Cholestech device. From these values, non-HDL cholesterol, which is an indicator of all apolipoprotein B-containing particles, is calculated by subtracting HDL from total cholesterol. Multivariable linear regression analyses of HDL and non-HDL levels versus BMI percentile and waist-to-height ratio as continuous variables adjusted for age and sex was performed. The potential impact of any smoking on the relationship between adiposity and lipids was assessed by including interaction terms. More than 17,000 adolescents were included, representing more than 80% of registered grade 9 students. 4.7% reported any smoking. 16.8% were overweight and 13.6% were obese, with 14.4% having an elevated and 3.5% having a very elevated waist-to-height ratio. Assessment of non-fasting cholesterol levels indicated a mean total cholesterol of 3.84 with a mean HDL level of 1.26. The mean calculated non-HDL level was 2.58. Note that these values are known to be valid in the non-fasting state and a recommended screening strategy in the lipid guidelines. This graph shows the mean HDL values stratified by BMI category and any smoking. From normal to overweight to obese, there is a progressive decrease in HDL, with a smaller further decrease associated with any smoking in the dark blue bars versus non-smokers in the light blue bars. From the regression analyses adjusted for age and sex, the trend toward lower HDL was significantly associated with increasing BMI percentile. After adjusting for BMI percentile, the effect of smoking was not significant, and there was no significant interaction between smoking and BMI percentile. In a further model using waist-to-height ratio as the indicator of adiposity, lower HDL was significantly associated with increasing waist-to-height ratio. Similarly, there was no significant effect of smoking and no significant interaction between smoking and waist-to-height ratio. This graph shows the mean non-HDL values stratified by BMI category and any smoking. From normal to overweight to obese, there is a progressive increase in non-HDL, with a smaller but variable further increase associated with any smoking in the dark blue bars versus non-smokers in the light blue bars. From the regression analyses adjusted for age and sex, the trend towards higher non-HDL was significantly associated with increasing BMI percentile. After adjusting for BMI percentile, the effect of smoking was not significant, and there was no significant interaction between smoking and BMI percentile. In a further model using waist-to-height ratio as the indicator of adiposity, higher non-HDL was significantly associated with increasing waist-to-height ratio. Similarly, there was no significant effect of smoking and no significant interaction between smoking and waist-to-height ratio. Therefore, based on these findings, we conclude that the relationship between lower HDL and higher non-HDL cholesterol with increasing adiposity was not significantly altered by current smoking in this population-based study of adolescents. Adiposity and smoking, therefore, appear to act independently to increase atherosclerotic risk in youth. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I will note that we won't have questions right after each presentation, but I do encourage you to come and approach our presenter either after the session today or at their posters or during lunch or anything like that. Great, so we'll move on, and our next speaker is Alicia Jamal, who will be presenting Cardiovascular Fitness and Not Physical Activity Mediates the Relationship Between Dyslipidemia and Higher Adiposity in Canadian Youth.
Same intro. So, hello, my name is Alicia Jamal, and I'm going to present to you our findings related to cardiovascular fitness and not physical activity mediate the relationship between dyslipidemia and higher adiposity in Canadian youth, and I have no conflicts of interest to declare. We know that obesity is associated with combined dyslipidemia, which is defined above. Combined dyslipidemia is associated with increased markers of early atherosclerosis in youth. Studies have found that physical activity interventions can improve lipid abnormalities even if there is little improvement in adiposity. In this study, we sought to determine to what extent does physical fitness or activity levels affect the relationship between adiposity and cardiometabolic risk, specifically lipids, in youth. In order to look at this relationship, we utilized the Canadian Health Measures Survey. The CHMS is utilized to collect key information relevant to the health of Canadians with the goal of obtaining national baseline data. The data is representative of the population. In this study, we included children aged 6 to 18 and looked at various measures of adiposity, lipids, physical activity, and physical fitness. The Modified Canadian Aerobic Fitness Test, or MCAFT, was utilized as a measure of physical fitness. Physical fitness is a measure of direct aerobic capacity and the ability for the body to function effectively and efficiently when performing physical activity. The MCAFT uses a ceiling heart rate to determine oxygen cost and aerobic fitness level. Participants can either do a 1 or 2-step test shown here. I will walk you through administering the MCAFT. First, the starting stage is determined based on the age of the participants. For example, for males aged 15 to 29, they would start on stage 4, whereas females would start on stage 3. The stage determines your step frequency or steps per minute. Participants step for 3 minutes and then subsequently measure their heart rate. If the heart rate is less than their predefined ceiling heart rate, they can go to the next stage. They continue the test until they reach this heart rate threshold and final stage. They can then utilize the AFS formula shown here to calculate their score. The oxygen cost is determined based on the final stage and age of the patient. The table here shows the variation in the scores. In order to determine the effect of physical fitness on the relationship between adiposity and cardiometabolic risk, we completed a mediation analysis. To do this, separate linear regression models were generated for each combination of cardiometabolic outcome, physical activity, and obesity variable. The variables are listed above. The total effect refers to the association between obesity and a cardiometabolic outcome. The direct effect refers to the association after it is adjusted for physical activity or fitness. The portion of the relationship between adiposity and cardiometabolic risk that was explained by physical activity, what we refer to as mediation, is calculated by subtracting the direct effect from the total effect. Both the total and direct effect models are adjusted for age, sex, socioeconomic status, and race. With respect to our population characteristics, we had an N of 1880 in cycle 1 and 1920 in cycle 2. The average age of our population was 11 years in both cycles, and approximately 52% were male in both cycles. For the first mediation analysis, we found that if someone has a certain BMI and your BMI increases, then this will increase your non-HDL cholesterol. However, once the MCAF score is added, the effect of BMI on non-HDL cholesterol decreases. In other words, if you are more fit, the association between BMI and non-HDL diminishes, so you have less of an increase in your non-HDL cholesterol. To determine the change in the relationship, in other words, to determine how much of an influence MCAF score has on the relationship between BMI and non-HDL, we can do the following calculation shown here. We found that the more physically fit you are, as determined by a higher MCAF score, the effect that BMI has on your non-HDL is reduced by 37%. In this mediation analysis, we looked at log BMI, non-HDL cholesterol, and MCAF score. We found that for non-HDL cholesterol, a higher MCAF score, indicating higher fitness, reduces the association between a higher non-HDL cholesterol and a higher log-transformed BMI by 35%. With respect to the relationship between non-HDL cholesterol, waist-to-hip ratio, and MCAF score, we found that if you are more physically fit with a higher MCAF score, the association between your waist-to-hip ratio and your non-HDL cholesterol will be reduced by 25%. Looking at the relationship between waist circumference, non-HDL cholesterol, and physical fitness, we found that a higher MCAF score, again indicative of a higher physical fitness, reduced the association between a higher waist circumference and non-HDL cholesterol by 40%. In this model, we found that a higher waist-to-hip ratio would be associated with a lower HDL. When MCAF score was included, we found that a higher MCAF score would reduce the association between waist-to-hip ratio and HDL by 12.5%. In other words, if you are more fit, the effect that your waist-to-hip ratio has on your HDL would be reduced by 12.5%. We also looked at the relationship between various intensities of physical activity and its association between adiposity measures and lipid measurements. In this study, physical activity was measured using an accelerometer. The table above shows the breakdown of the intensity levels and the associated accelerometer count range. Interestingly, we found that for all measures of adiposity and for all lipid variables, their association was not significantly mediated by the inclusion of physical activity in the models. It seems that from this study, physical activity that doesn't seem to influence your level of fitness is unlikely to help you metabolically if you are overweight. In terms of other findings, we also found that a higher MCAF score reduces the association between triglycerides and BMI by 34%, waist-to-hip ratio by 26%, waist circumference by 27%, and log transform BMI by 33%. A higher MCAF score mediated the association between waist-to-hip ratio and total cholesterol by 66%. In summary, we found that better physical fitness mitigates the undesirable effect of adiposity on higher non-HDL cholesterol and higher triglycerides. While higher physical activity levels may improve physical fitness, this study suggested that better physical fitness is associated with more favorable lipid profiles in youth with increasing adiposity.
Great, thank you so much, Alicia. So our next presenter is Jennifer McConnell, who will be presenting body fat percentile curves for children and youth of Asian and European ancestry.
All right, so we know that there are significant public health and economic costs associated with obesity, as well as potential adverse physical and mental health effects for children. But it's specifically the adipose tissue that's responsible for many of the adverse health effects. So it's important that we understand as much as we can about the development of body fat as children and youth age. So for BMI, we use growth charts like these that show the attained value at a given centile, because individuals tend to track along a centile, and we can identify when they might be off track and intervene on potential pathologies. But nothing exists like this for body fat percent or body fat percent velocity for Canadian children and youth. So where a body fat percent chart will show the attained value at a given age, a velocity chart's actually showing you the rate of change at a given age. So that will show, pathologies will show up there before they actually affect the attained values, and it will allow us to identify them earlier and potentially intervene earlier if someone's getting off track for body fat percent. So what our group did is we used gamless models in R to generate sex and ethnic specific body fat percent and body fat percent velocity centile curves from the 3rd to the 97th centile for children and youth of Asian and European ancestry. So our sample here is 940 children from the University of British Columbia's Healthy Bones 3 mixed longitudinal study. So each individual is measured between 1 and 17 times, resulting in over 4,700 total measurements, broken up about evenly between boys and girls, and also both of our ethnic groups. And we measured body fat with full body DEXA scans. We calculated body fat percent as total fat mass over total body mass, and body fat percent velocity by the change in body fat percent between measurement occasions divided by the length of time between those measurement occasions. We also had parents or guardians complete health history questionnaires where we got the child's sex, age, and also their ethnic groups. We classified them as Asian if both parents or 3 of 4 grandparents were born in one of 6 Asian countries, and our reference group if both parents or 3 of 4 grandparents were born in North America or Canada. So what I'm going to present to you next is 4 sets of centile curves. We're going to look at each sex group together first and then break them up between ethnic groups. We're going to look at the Asian children on the red dashed lines and the reference children on the black lines. And we're going to look at body fat percent first and then body fat percent velocity next. So our first set of curves here is for all girls together. And what we can see is they converge slightly over time, but they're relatively flat leading up to puberty. There's not a lot of change before about age 13. So we can see there's an effective maturation there where body fat percent doesn't start to increase until after they mature. But when we break them up by ethnic group, we can see that the body fat percent values are fairly similar at age 9 for both groups, but by age 19, the Asian girls actually have a higher body fat percent value at every single centile compared to the reference girls. And we can also see that they tend to be continuing on an upward trajectory whereas the curves for the reference girls have started to flatten out by age 19. When we look at the curves for the boys, we can see they're significantly different shaped than we saw for the girls. And there's also a stronger effect of maturity or puberty, where there's a steeper increase leading up to about age 13 or 14 and a sharper decline afterwards. And there's also more effect at the higher centiles, where our lower centiles remain relatively flat. And when we break them up by ethnic group, we can see that the values are fairly similar at age 9 for both ethnic groups, but by age 19, the Asian boys have higher body fat percent values at most centiles, but the curves have a very different shape, where the Asian boys actually see their increase leading up to puberty a bit earlier, and the centiles intersect over time. Now for the velocity curves, all of the centiles below that blue line are actually negative, so they lost body fat percent between measurement occasions. And you can see here, these are very smooth curves, they're very predictable. We'd be able to predict where someone would end up, and they converge a lot over time. So there's not a lot of variation by age 19, but a lot of variation at age 9. And when we break them up by ethnic groups for girls, there's not a lot of difference. They track almost exactly on the same centiles over time. The only real thing we can notice here is at age 19, our reference population has a greater variation between the 97th and 3rd centile, whereas our Asian girls have really converged and there's much less variation. Now for the boys, these curves are again very different shaped, and we can see that there's actually some centiles here that cross above and below 0, so they contain positive and negative values over time, and we didn't see that for the girls. And again, we can see a much stronger influence of puberty here, which is to be expected as the boys gain muscle mass and lose body fat mass as they grow. And when we split these up by ethnic group, we can see that although the Asian boys have higher body fat percent velocity values at age 10 and age 19, the shape of the curves are completely different. They intersect, they cross each other, they actually have a steeper decline earlier and a steeper subsequent rebound than our reference boys. So what does this mean? Overall, there's a lot of heterogeneity here between our age and ethnic groups across our body fat percent and body fat percent velocity curves. So if you have an individual and you're comparing them to a growth reference, it's important to know who that growth reference was developed on and what population is it really appropriate for. And now to put these values in context a little bit, we don't have agreed upon body fat percent cutoffs for health risks for children, but for adults, we often use 25% for men and 35% for women, and those are associated with increased cardiometabolic risk factors. So for our children at age 18, they intersect for 25% and 35%. Our reference girls and boys cross at the 90th centile. So that's where we'd expect to see increased risk. And for our Asian boys, they also cross to 25% at the 90th centile, but our girls actually reached 35% at the 83rd centile. So they reached a body fat percent that put them at risk, 7 points lower than our reference girls did. So going forward, we hope that these data can be used to compare geographical differences across Canada, to monitor secular trends in body composition for British Columbian children and youth. But we need more research of this nature that actually includes health outcomes and health measurements to kind of be able to determine where our children are actually at risk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So our final speaker now is Tracy McDonough, who will be presenting Growing Little Sprouts, Enhancing Supportive Environments in Childcare Settings.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy McDonough, here from Kingston, Ontario. Specifically, I'm a registered dietitian, and I work with Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington Public Health. Today, I'll be providing an overview of a pilot program in childcare centers that was run by KFL&A Public Health called Growing Little Sprouts. Governments and experts have repeatedly recommended that healthy environments be established within childcare settings to prevent childhood obesity. Children in Ontario are spending at least 6 hours a day in school or childcare. Therefore, it is essential that childcare environments positively influence children's eating and activity habits. Center-based childcare policies on nutrition and physical activity have been associated with health-promoting changes such as staff modeling healthy eating and active play more often. In a survey of centers in the Kingston, Ontario region, we found that 57% of centers did not have a written nutrition policy, and most had an informal or unwritten policy for physical activity. The objectives of this pilot were to increase the number of centers with a written plan in place to improve center-based policies on nutrition and physical activity, to increase participant self-efficacy to improve policies, and to increase participant awareness of public health as a resource for policy development. We had 13 licensed childcare providers in the Kingston region that participated. Participating centers provided extended day, full day, or partial day programming for children right from birth. Centers were relatively small, with the majority having fewer than 10 staff and the remainder having fewer than 30 staff. Interested childcare center directors were asked to select whether their center wanted to focus on nutrition only, physical activity only, or nutrition and physical activity. Directors were also asked to identify a frontline staff person who would act as a champion throughout the pilot and be most responsible for carrying out those activities. Specifically, champions were asked to attend meetings and connect with public health on a regular basis. They were asked to complete a center-based assessment on their nutrition and physical activity environments. They were expected to set goals based on the completed assessment and then create an action plan to meet those goals. Project leads from public health provided champions with toolkits, and these toolkits contained templates for them to be completing their center-based assessment on nutrition and physical activity, as well as templates for completing goal setting and action planning. These toolkits also included sample policies for their selected topic, as well as background information on the best practices that were included in those sample policies. To evaluate the pilot process as well as outcomes, champions completed pre- and post-pilot questionnaires looking at their attitudes and self-efficacy related to policy work. They were asked to submit their completed assessment, goal setting, and action planning tools. And they were also asked to submit pre- and post policies on their nutrition and physical activity. One nutrition site had produced a brand new nutrition policy at the 4-month mark, and this policy contained 82% of the best practices that were in the sample policy they received. 3/4 of the nutrition sites did indicate at 4 months that they were working on policy as well. 4 of our physical activity sites had produced new physical activity policies at the 4-month mark, and these policies contained, on average, 75% of the best practices in the sample policy provided to them. At the 4-month mark, 67% of these sites indicated in their action plans that they were working on changes to their policy. At the 8-month follow-up, however, we heard that 80% of respondents had completed a revised or new nutrition or physical activity policy for their center. And this is quite comparable with results of a similar intervention that we found in the literature that had 73% of childcare centers developing a new or revising their current nutrition or physical activity policy after 8 months. So this process also resulted in benefits at the champion level. So at the end of the pilot, more participants reported knowing a lot or a fair amount about incorporating best practices for physical activity and nutrition into their programs, as well as creating policies and procedures. Champions reported using a team approach as they engaged their colleagues in each step of the pilot. Most centers had very close involvement of managers, supervisors, and directors, or even board of directors at their centers, as approval from these members was required in order to finalize changes to their center policies. Champions felt their role was clear, enjoyable, rewarding, and important. Champions reported feeling that they made a positive impact on their center, as well as in the lives of their families and children that they provide care for. Champions reported developing a rewarding and collaborative relationship with KFL&A Public Health throughout the pilot. Connecting with KFL&A Public Health was reported to be a motivating factor for them to meet their goals throughout the pilot. And all champions reported that they would recommend other centers consult with KFL&A Public Health if they were looking to revise or create new policies for their sites. So participants received the pilot relatively well as positive feedback was received. However, participants are assumed to be early adopters or innovators in their field. Therefore, unique strategies or resources and supports are required to recruit and retain late adopters if we wish to roll this program out in the future. Lastly, encouraging involvement of supervisors, managers, and directors early on in the program can increase buy-in and support. That is required for frontline staff to take time away from their day-to-day duties to connect with colleagues and complete the assessment, goal setting, and action planning steps. So it can be concluded that this pilot was a success. Most centers had developed or revised their nutrition or physical activity by the end of the 8-month follow-up. And this indicated to us that future programming efforts should have an extended duration of at least 8 months so that we can capture these positive changes in policies that are resulting from this program. Growing Little Sprouts is now a full program that's being implemented at KFL&A Public Health, and we have now integrated breastfeeding as a topic, and this was done at the request of our childcare community. We have made changes to our process based on the findings of the pilot as well. We have 15 centers now participating, with 6 focusing on breastfeeding, 3 on nutrition, and 5 on physical activity.
Thank you so much, Tracy. So I think we can say that all our presenters did an amazing job and give them a huge round of applause. And just one final big thank you to our judges who did a great job. Well, I'm assuming they did a great job. I haven't seen the marks yet. Assessing all of our presenters. And again, the winners will be announced at the awards reception on Friday at 4:30. So again, now you can grab a box lunch or head over to the other conference center for a hot lunch and lunchtime presentations.